So I'm Janice Jorgensen. I'm with the Hampshire Bird Club Education Committee. Today we have a totally different topic than what we usually think of having, but we're really excited because it was something that was done in sort of our backyard up in Franklin County. We have two really great people tonight on who you will become more familiar with. We have Erika Nesse. Is that how I say it? Is that correct, Erika? Nesse. Oh, like the monster. All right. Good, Erika. So a little bit about Erika. Software developer. I'm sure we all are skilled in that area, right? And has a real interest in creative uses of computing, which probably some of us have not gone in that direction. Couple things about Erika is she's made generative music and used GPT-3, which I don't even know what that is, Erika, to make an independent magazine. Interested in using AI, you know what that is? Artificial intelligence, okay, for good purposes. And one of those is what we're going to see tonight, which is like monitoring biodiversity. And she was part of this project of capturing the sounds in Conway, Mass. Last spring. The other person participating tonight is Alex Milne. Is that correct, Alex? I forgot to ask you.
Yes.
Okay. And he is interested in and been involved in audio technology and bioacoustics and research for the past 10 years. He's done some exploratory things and developed wireless audio products, microphones and antennas for the entertainment production industry, and is a researcher in nonlinear optics and policy. Now, somebody's going to have to explain what that is, because several of us probably don't know what that is. And currently working in research on regenerative agriculture, and is a resident in Greenfield in our backyard. So we welcome you. They're going to do their presentation and they will answer any questions you have. We're going to do the questions at the end. Please put them in the chat box, or if you forget and we get to that question section, then we'll ask you to unmute your mic and go forward. And Monique is another member of the Ed Committee, is going to help facilitate the chat box. So take it away, Alex and Erika.
All right. Thank you, Janice, for the warm welcome. And it's really good to be here. I'm just going to jump right into the presentation. So I'm going to share my screen. One moment as I figure this out. Oh. All right. You should see. Do you see?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah,
okay.
We see your slide.
Great. So today, Erika and I are going to be talking to you about the bioacoustics project that we did last May 2022, in an area of Conway, Massachusetts called the South Bend. I happen to be from Conway myself, originally. Now I live in Greenfield. But before we get into that, just a little bit of context about who we are, Erika and me, and what we do, what we're doing here. Hyla Research, that's the name of our small community research collective, which has a focus on ecosystems, especially using new modes and methods of measurement like artificial intelligence. We've already had a nice introduction, so I'll just skip over who Erika and Alex are. But for some context, we met while we were working at the New England Complex Systems Institute. We found we had shared interests, especially in sound, and we became good friends and decided to start Hyla Research as a place where we could home our independent projects. The first of which was the bioacoustics project we did last year in Conway. But before we go any further, I want to pose a question, and that is, if a recorder records a bird singing in the forest, does that exist? This is a variant of the classic, if a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, doesn't make a sound. And our answer to you is yes. There are other ways to answer that question if there are philosophers in the room, but we're going to assume that, yes, the bird does exist. And also, before we get into the project specifically, we thought it might be helpful to give some background on what bioacoustics is specifically and what it's good for. Bioacoustics is an interdisciplinary science, sometimes a practice, that combines biology, acoustics, and computer science. And bioacoustics can reveal clues. Bioacoustics is pretty new, so it's not revealing facts quite yet, but it can reveal clues about the biology, evolution, ecology, and behavior of organisms. And that includes animals, plants, even microorganisms, and possibly humans as well. The subdisciplines within bioacoustics include soundscape ecology, which is what most of us think of when we think of bioacoustics, a recording of an environment with lots of animals making their sounds. But it also includes mechanisms of biological sound and hearing, which is like physically what is happening with biological membranes as sound is coming into and going out of organisms. Cognition of sound and meaning in animals specifically sort of overlaps with linguistics, how animals use sound to acquire, store, and use information. The cognitive abilities of animals like learning, memory, attention, and decision-making. Also communication between individuals and within a community, structure, function, and meaning of animal signals or sounds, and how they vary across species, contexts, and also environments. Noise is an increasingly important factor in bioacoustic analyses. How, especially human noise, how does anthropogenic noise affect animal communication and health? And a hint, it's not good usually. And also evolution and genomics, which is a very deep hole, and we won't go into that now. Bioacoustics is, I find it fascinating because it operates at multiple scales. From the cellular, individual cells make sounds. They make lots of sounds. I was involved in a project that listened to cancer cells dividing in a petri dish and tried to infer some useful information, some predictive information about those cells. Individual animals making sounds, populations of animals making sounds, communities, and then all the way up to whole ecosystems making sound. And there's a number of interesting differences between measuring ecosystems and biodiversity with microphones versus cameras. This is an important consideration because many studies use photographs and camera traps to quantify the abundance of species in an environment. So sound first, audio, unlike static photographs, it takes place in time. It's temporal. Has a beginning and an end. And second, audio is it's a spatial phenomenon. The space represented by audio is omnidirectional. Sounds arrive from everywhere and from all directions surrounding the microphone. This is very unlike a photograph taken through a lens, which only captures a narrow and constrained point of view. Third, this is sort of a nerdy point, but when compared to imaging and moving images, audio is remarkably efficient. The amount of space or memory required to store audio information is much lower than what's required to store visual information. For example, you can fit maybe a few hours of video on a DVD, whereas you can fit days or weeks of audio on that same DVD, depending on how the audio is encoded. And there was a time not that long ago when bioacoustics did not involve computers, but today, for all practical purposes, bioacoustics as a discipline is now an application of computer science. And that application is one of signal processing and machine learning that's used to identify animal sounds and quantify natural soundscapes. All right. a higher level overview of what is it that we want bioacoustics to do? What are we after? We're trying to transform acoustic patterns into word labels. So just like a human hears uh, a red-winged blackbird and says, ah, that sound is a red-winged blackbird, that's what we want computers and bioacoustics to do. We want them to identify acoustic patterns in the environment and assign meaning to them. And that also goes for communication. Maybe someday in the distant future, there will be a universal bird translator that you can hold your phone up in the air and it will tell you what the birds are actually saying to one another. We're not there yet, but maybe someday. Also, bioacoustics, we wanted to detect anomalies. For example, if there were, I'm not saying there is, but if there were an ivory-billed woodpecker and it made a call in the forest and there was only a recorder around to hear it, we would probably want to identify that anomaly. And that also goes for species that are like far north of their range, or what do they call it? Vagrants, migrants to different continents. I'll speed up here a little bit. We want to identify spatial patterns across time, migration, feeding locations. For our purposes, for this project, biodiversity tracking and analysis, species abundance and richness. And of course, we want bioacoustics to be useful to everyone, not just to researchers and academics. Okay, so with that out of the way, our project, which we call Birds of South Bend, was an AI, artificial intelligence analysis of environmental audio from the South Bend area of Conway, Massachusetts. I've got a map later that shows exactly where that is. We recorded audio at 7 sites from May 1st to June 4th, 2022. Those sites were lined up along a transect or a straight line across the habitat area. We then took that audio and put it through the software program known as BirdNET, which is from Cornell's Lab of Ornithology. It's a bird call recognition artificial intelligence. It's different from the BirdNET that you get on your phone. It's also different from Merlin. Once we processed the audio through BirdNET, we produced a list of birds that was detected by the algorithm throughout the entire recording period. And although we could have identified like how many of each species there was, we pooled everything. So we just came up with a simple count list of each bird that was identified by the algorithm. We also produced some charts and infographics, which we will show later on in the presentation. And to informally improve our confidence about whether the list that BirdNET provided to us was accurate or inaccurate, we compared our data with historical data from the 2011 Massachusetts Breeding Bird Atlas in the same quadrant, and we found some pretty good agreement. And we also, I kept a list. I'm not a birder. I should say that I'm not a birder. But I kept a list nonetheless of birds that I cited or heard, and there were 2 birders in the area we collaborated with. And we also compared the list that came out of BirdNET with the pooled list from local birders. So how does it work? How do we actually get the audio from the field? We used what are called autonomous recording units, ARUs, but that's just a fancy name for a recorder which is configured in a way with a weatherproof housing with batteries so that it can record either discontinuously or continuously for periods of days, weeks, or months automatically without needing to be there. So the recorders were placed in the field. You see one here that's peeking out of an elm tree. And then I walked away and then came back weeks or a month later. And altogether, we recorded 1,125 hours of audio, which was quite a lot. And just to give you another idea, this is one type of recorder that we used. We used two different types. This is an audio moth, which is relatively low cost. You can see it on a tree there. It's quite inconspicuous, very difficult to see. Sometimes I couldn't find them when I went back. And these recorders, they have audio quality which is quite a bit better than your phone. So where were these sites? Where exactly were we recording? It's within the South Bend area of Massachusetts, it's along the South River, to the south of Shelburne Falls Road and to the north of Graves Road. For people not from town, that might not make too much sense. But it's a little bit west of the Bardwell Ferry Bridge. And sites were chosen for how much avian biodiversity they seem to contain, as well as being different from one another. And yeah, you can see the study area highlighted in pink there. And all of this is on our website, by the way, so you'll get a link to that and be able to look in detail. Now I'm going to go through each of the sites so you get an idea of the diversity of habitats that we sampled. This was site 1, which was way up high, about elevation of 800 feet. This is a secondary growth of sloped woodland of oak, black birch, striped maple, and eastern white pine. Very invasive on the bottom with invasive barberry. Site 2, and we're proceeding down from the mountaintop all the way down to the South River itself in a transect line. So a little bit lower down, site 2, in a wet meadow situated within a broad mid-successional shrubland, ash, eastern white pine, apple, Russian olive, multiflora rose, bulrush, hayfern, goldenrod, a typical, mix of invasive and native species that you find in abandoned fields in New England. Site 3 is also part of that shrubland. Ash, white pine, buckthorn, lots of goldenrods, a lot of roses all over the place. That's what you're seeing there. And site 4, we actually didn't end up recording site 4, but we kind of kept it for technical reasons. So I'm just going to skip to site 5. Another sloped woodland, late successional eastern white pine, lots of cherry, sugar maple, also lots of invasive barberry, fern, and spice bush. Now, site 6 was all the way down on the South River itself. Pretty interesting site on the concave bank adjacent to the west-facing cut bank of the eastern arm of the southern bend of the South River. Pretty diverse woodland, hemlock, yellow birch, black birch, sugar maple, beech, shagbark hickory, sycamore. This one was interesting because there was a lot of noise since it was right by the river, but we still got quite a few birds, even though the rustling of the rapids were right there. I think the Louisiana water thrush was one of the first or most prominent that we recorded at site 6. Site 7 is a small wetland with cattail, hornbeam, and witch hazel, surrounded by really dense fern, and then within a woodland of hemlock, birches, white pine, and sugar maple. And then site 8 is a Phragmites reed marsh. Phragmites, there's some controversy about whether it is invasive or not. I tend to think it's not, based on the 8,000-year-old peat records that we have of Phragmites being here, but maybe I shouldn't go down that road. And this site 8, is where we recorded the most birds. More species of birds were observed at site 8 than any other site. And with that, I will allow Erika to take the reins. Erika.
All right, so taking all this audio from all these beautiful sites, we took this audio and sent it through an AI. And so just briefly, how does AI for bird call recognition work? And machine learning is kind of like human learning. It's given audio labeled with the bird species, and then it attempts to predict the species. If it's bad, it gets negative feedback. If it's good, it gets positive feedback, and be more like that. And it turns out this works pretty well. And it can, and it predicts the species or whether there is no bird. And it gives a confidence score of how well it thinks it did. Next slide. So BirdNET is so both BirdNET and Merlin are Cornell's projects that are on the phone. We use the desktop version of BirdNET, which allowed us to bulk recognize birds for hours long files, and we got labels of bird species within the file, and I'll show you that in a minute. And then we were able to summarize the results of like how many birds do we see, how many calls per day, and things like that. I don't I don't recognize this slide. What is this? Oh, this is
That's
about BirdNet. Okay.
Yeah, we've already made clear, I think, that the software we're using is not the software that you get on your phone, even though it's named the same, BirdNet.
Oh yeah, well it is, I think it's part of the same project, but it's a different software application. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And okay, so we found 116 species of birds, according to BirdNet. And so of our human birders, we found 73 out of the 79 species that they recorded for the year. And we found 97 out of 120 species that were in the 2011 Massachusetts Bird Survey for our quadrants that we were in. And here's just a little peek of the list on our websites, our website, that gives the count of birds, and it gives a little bit about the confidence score, just so you can see. All right. This is a species accumulation curve, and all this shows is that, like, as time went on, we recorded more and more species, and it sort of leveled off towards the end. So we think that's gives us some confidence that we saw all the birds that we could see. So this is a chart of species presence over time. So it goes, from the count is the number of calls. Yes, the count is the number of calls that were identified. Yep. And this just shows over time. So this is how many calls per day were of that species. And you can tell that the species came and went, and they were stronger sometimes than others. So we have all this data, and we've pretty carefully kept notes about where it's coming from and stuff. So we're going to open source our data, and it'll be available for learning new things in the future. And next, I am going to share my screen and give you some soundscapes. Okay, so this is an example of a labeled file by BirdNet. So it's telling us that there's an eastern phoebe in this area, so I'm just going to play it. And then over here, we've got a chestnut-sided warbler. And then we were also able to make sort of mega mixes of particular birds. So I took like 10-second clips of several of our wood thrush recordings and made them into a larger file. Okay, and Alex, you can go back to the...
Sure, yeah. I just want to give you some extra credit there, though, because all of the difficult technical stuff was done by Erika. I was merely a technician, basically. And I just want to clarify what that last file you were playing there was. Erika was able to identify every single instance of a wood thrush throughout the entire month of May, and then compress that into a single file. So that's like a track list of every single bird wood thrush that was identified. Maybe not that was there. Right. And I think that's super cool. So yeah, bear with me while I share my screen again. Okay. How's that?
Yep.
Showing up? Yeah, okay. Just wrangling windows here. All right, so I think in hindsight, this slide might be a little bit known to this audience, but focusing specifically on what bioacoustics can do for birds, avian bioacoustics, which is a very rich area of study. Technology can help unravel some of the mysteries, some, not all, of the mysteries of avian vocalization, which is complex, nuanced, and multifunctional. We've learned through bioacoustics that birds learn and remember, or should I say we've confirmed that. There are, for example, regional dialects. White-crowned sparrows have distinct regional dialects across North America. We've learned that birds eavesdrop for interspecies communication. For example, birds listening to alarm calls of other species to detect predators. And we've learned a lot through bioacoustic conservation and monitoring, which is more or less what we did. Methods used to monitor bird populations, their increases, their declines. And finally, the effects of anthropogenic or human-created noise on birds. And that's bad. Anthropogenic noise is generally speaking bad, not good, at least for birds. Dipping into a little bit of the history of bioacoustics before there was recorded sound, which started maybe, well, digital wasn't that long ago, but you know, the gramophone and stuff like that was about 150 years ago. Well, there was bioacoustics before then. It was called transcriptions, and initially bird songs would be listened to by composers and transcribed into musical notation. Over time, that musical notation evolved into a more elaborate, a more complicated and finer, detailed notation, as you can see on the right there. However, there are limitations because the frequency resolution of the human ear is insufficient to hear some of the, I'm going to get the terminology wrong, again, not a birder, some of the very rapid pitch shifts that happen in complex bird vocalizations. So there's a limit to what you can actually decipher with your own ear. And that changed during the advent of the sonogram. And the sonogram is a visual representation of a recorded portion of, it could be anything, but usually we associate it with a isolated bird call or bird song. And in the old days, it was an analog or digital, like 5 to 10 second slice of audio that was fed into this machine, and there was this rotating drum that would spin around, and this needle, sort of like a seismograph, that would draw the waveform onto a piece of paper, and then you unroll it and go, huh, look at that. Wow, who knew? But these days we use spectrograms. Spectrogram is a digital version of a sonogram, basically. It's much more flexible and higher resolution. These are 4 spectrograms from our study. Time is on the x-axis on the bottom, or horizontal, and frequency is on the y-axis or vertical. So sounds that are lower in frequency are on the bottom, sounds that are higher in frequency on the top. And the color of the patterns represents the intensity or amplitude of the sound. And Janice made us aware that some of you may be familiar with spectrograms because they're included in Milne as well as other programs, which is really great because it's an important component of analyzing animal vocalizations. So starting to wrap up here, speaking as non-birders, we sort of brainstormed, how can bioacoustics make birding even better? Well, bioacoustics can reinforce or even enhance human observations. We've seen through applications like Milne that it can make birding a bit more accessible to a wider community. Some people I've spoken to find birding, I won't say more fun, but fun in a different way when bioacoustics is involved and participatory, especially when it's merged with interactive databases like eBird, which is an incredible project. And I would say bioacoustics could make birding even better by preventing species extinctions as well. I've had a few conversations with birders over the months here since we've done this project, and I think it's totally fair and reasonable to say, well, wait a second, how do we know? Wait a second. How does that work? And there are a few reasons to trust that the results we get from bioacoustics are in fact true. One of them is recorders do not sleep. Unlike the absolute best, most maverick birder out there, recorders, they don't sleep. They keep going 24/7, and you can place them in very remote locations where people cannot go or do not usually go. Birds, there are studies on this. Birds don't notice recorders. At least they don't notice recorders as much as they notice people moving around or posed with binoculars at their eyes. And artificial intelligence, the attention is unwavering. Unlike people who need to do things like blink or take a sip of coffee, artificial intelligence has like sort of this flawless intelligence. That being said, there are lots of reasons not to trust bioacoustics as it currently stands. Bioacoustics and AI, as remarkable as it is, still has a way to go. And we learned that mockingbirds as well as catbirds can certainly fool the algorithm into making a wrong identification when it's in fact a mockingbird or a catbird emulating songs of other birds. Batteries, this is a big problem. Batteries go dead, and especially in the forest where there's not much light, solar panels aren't very good. And then we get to perhaps the most important reasons here not to trust bioacoustics, and those are false positives and false negatives. A false positive is when a bird is incorrectly identified as present when it is actually absent, and a false negative is when a bird is incorrectly identified as absent, as not there, when it's actually present. And these last two problems, false positives and false negatives, these are big problems. They have serious consequences when they occur, and they are technically very difficult to resolve. However, the state of the art continues to advance, and with the contributions and participation of birders, we hope that bioacoustics will continue to progress. So thank you very much. That's our presentation. And looks like we've got some questions in the chat, which we'll be happy to answer now if I can figure out how to.
Alex, this is
Yeah.
Monique. I probably can help here. Thank you very much, both to you and Erica, for an excellent presentation. We do have some questions in the chat, and I'll just get it started here. So in the chat here, M. Aldridge, you had a question. Did you want to ask the team? All right, still on mute.
Melissa, Monique, Melissa sometimes has connection problems.
Okay, so I can ask more. Thanks, Janice. The count is the count the number of calls attributed to one species?
Yes, the count is how many times a call was identified, and the calls were identified over, I think, 5 seconds. So it's like every 5 seconds, if that bird is there, that counts as one count.
All right, very good. Janice, was your question answered in the chat, or would you like to ask it again?
No, it looks like Erica, mine was on that really beautiful blue, the chart that showed the lot of blue, and so I looked at a couple birds to say if it was the more blue must have been singing more often and for the entire period of time you were recording. Is that what we were to understand from that?
Yeah,
slide?
yeah. So the blue was like per day.
Can you pop that slide up? Is that a
Oh,
problem?
sure. Alex, could you get that up?
Yep.
It's a cool slide.
Yeah, so the more blue it is, the more it was there on that particular day.
Here we go. Back in time. Oh, there we go.
Yep. So I see like black and white warbler and black cap chickadee, which are right in the middle. They were like singing all the time.
Yeah.
Every day.
Some of them were coming every day and singing a lot. Yep.
And the black poles, not so much.
Yep.
Okay. That's a
All
cool
right.
slide. Now, you have more, like it only goes to C on that page. So you have them, all the other.
Oh, yeah,
yeah. I'll put a link to our actual website.
Okay,
chat so you can
great.
see the whole thing.
Yeah, it's all there on our website. You can scroll through. It's much more detailed on the website. Okay, there we go.
All right. Maggie Kearney, you have a question that you wanted to ask?
Hi. Hi. I was just trying to figure out, kind of related to the earlier question, whether you can actually tell individual birds or just the number of calls from that species, which could be all from one bird. Can you distinguish little subtle differences that might be different birds?
Not yet. Oh, sorry, Erica, you were gonna.
Oh, I say the methodology that we used only identifies species, not individuals. Although I saw a talk from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology recently that was talking about how someone did try to use similar methods to identify whether, like, how many birds were in a certain location. It sounded complicated, but apparently some people are trying to do that. So.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah, that's sometimes called individual fingerprinting, and
Mhm.
that's the next frontier. is identifying individuals within a population and tracking them across space and time. Someday.
Okay, thank you.
Jim, you had a question? Jim, you had a question you posted.
He's still on.
Yeah, it's still on. Let me ask for him. So in the yeah, all right. He has said in the chat about the birds that the AI found and birders didn't. Are they birds that are harder to see in general, or was it more the location that they were recorded in?
So I can take this one. It's more about birds that are harder to hear. So the human birders recorded a larger number of predatory birds of prey. Again, I'm not a birder, but birds of prey tend to vocalize less. And so they were not captured by the bioacoustic algorithm. The density of coverage of recorders was actually pretty dense. So I tend to think that you know, the number of hours that humans were in the field was far surpassed by the number of hours that were recorded at all hours of days and night by the recorder. But this question, Jim, if you're still on, I mean, this is, it gets to the heart of it. Is a bioacoustic artificial intelligence algorithm equal to, better, or worse than a human observer? And if so, in what ways? And I think, Erika, correct me if I'm wrong, this is an active area of research, is figuring out how to improve the confidence and accuracy of these algorithms in relation to human birders, and determining what exactly is causing differences in detection thresholds for individual species. And for some species, like, I don't know what, are there any silent birds out there, mute birds? Bioacoustics probably won't work for them. But there's a lot of room for this type of technology to grow and improve as well.
All right, Ruth Pullen, you had a question? Ruth, you had a question you posted in the chat?
She writes that her microphone is not working. So
All
go
right.
ahead.
All right, I'll ask for how much of the range of bird vocalizations are outside the average human hearing range, both higher and lower? Are bioacoustics trained to hear these sounds?
So, Erika, is it okay if I take this one?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Bird calls, bird vocalizations generally are within the range of human hearing. I'm not aware of any birds that have ranges, and the range of human hearing is between 20 hertz and 20,000 kilohertz. However, as we get older, the upper end of that starts to level off, and it's harder, sometimes impossible, to hear sounds above 16,000 hertz. And there are plenty of birds that vocalize in a higher register. That might be difficult for individual people to hear. I've done some bioacoustics with insects, and insects tend to have way higher vocalizations than humans can hear, as well as mammals. But to my knowledge, which might not be correct, most birds are within the range of human hearing, at least of an infant's hearing. And bioacoustics, this super cool question here from Ruth is, can bioacoustics be trained to hear these sounds? The answer is yes. Bioacoustics is used notably in cetacean research, whales, whales have very low frequency vocalizations, and there's a whole pile of research being done on cetaceans from, I don't know, like the 1960s onwards. Likewise, there's not as much research on insect emissions, but it's possible. It has more to do with the type of microphone and digital recorder used than it does the algorithm. But it's totally possible. It's even possible to record plants, which make very high frequency, they're called cavitations, and bring those frequencies down into the human range of hearing and pass it through an algorithm.
All right. Janice Epko, you have a question?
I'm sorry. My question was, what was the brand of the recorder? You did say, but I missed it.
Yeah, I'll just pop that in the chat for you, Janice,
Okay, great.
because it's a little bit hard to spell.
All right, Jim has another question. What is the acceptable percentage of misidentifications?
That might be a threshold question, Erika.
Yeah, so it was actually difficult for us to figure out, since we didn't have like a human in the field constantly figuring this thing out, like, because we actually had a choice to make. We have this threshold level, and we have to say, okay, well, what threshold do we want? And I think the best evidence we have is so when we posted this on Facebook, we got feedback that some of the birds seemed unlikely. So then we put together audio files of those birds, and we sent them to expert bird by ear birders, and we got some feedback back, and it turned out that some of them were catbirds or some other form of bird. A few of them were marked as true. So yeah, I don't know what the acceptable percentage of misidentifications is, and it's hard to even figure out what the percentage is. And that's more a question for the people actually creating the AI system, I think.
All right. M. Aldridge has 3 questions. You want to ask those questions?
Go ahead and ask him for Melissa.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go forward here. 3 questions she asked that is posted here is AI must have heard more owls than human birders.
Well, in our case, we didn't actually identify any owls. However, I know that before BirdNET, especially the Pacific Northwest, owls are a focal point of bioacoustics research because of their nocturnal habits.
I mean, I suppose we were mostly recording during the day, weren't we?
Yeah, I mean, I tried to mix it up. We had the audio bots recording from 1 a.m. to 2 a.m. and I was hoping to get some like whippoorwills. No, wait. Yeah, whippoorwills as well as owls, but none showed up. And Site 8 was recording continuously day and night. So we may have just missed it. But that's a good question.
Another question that was asked is also interest in species that were missed from 2011 to the AI data. I'm guessing golden winged warbler, perhaps.
Yeah, that I don't have that one off the top of my head, but there is a way to compare if you go on our website, which Erika put in the chat. you can scroll down and there's a comparative table between our study, the 2011 Massachusetts Breeding Bird Survey, MBBA, and myself and the two birders. And you can see for yourself which birds were identified in each category of study.
All right. That's all I see in the questions of the chat. Is there any other questions?
Alex and Erica, I talked to them the other night in a pre-session, and there was one bird that people would have here, I think birders would love to know that you found, and it was very likely that it wasn't an error. Do you want to name that bird?
Sure. So when we passed our audio files of dubious birds to our expert listener, we got a confirmation on a hooded warbler, as well as a blue. Did I say that right? Hooded warbler?
Hooded is the big one.
Yeah, hooded warbler and a blue-winged warbler, but hooded is a big one. Okay. Yes. So
Okay, so my next question is, here for us in the valley, we tend to get, Janice, help me if I'm wrong, Janice Zepko, that's a like Westfield higher up bird, right? Higher elevation. And so I was just curious if that was found in the higher elevation part of your transect.
Ooh, I don't think we can find that out for you, but I don't think we pass that metadata on through the process. But we can figure that out pretty easily.
We have it in our base data, but we don't have all that like turned into charts.
No, and those are all like birder things. Like, okay, where might it be, right?
Well, that's what we want to provide is information that's useful and interesting and meaningful to folks. So we might do that as a follow-up post, is segment by elevation and site.
Thank you. And I think all of us have experienced Merlin, where if we play it and then, or we're using it and it says such and such, sometimes we don't see that bird singing in the spectrograph, and we can't even hear it, right? But it said that was it. And other times it identifies a bird, it's there, but we had no clue it was there. Have no. So I understand that, like the misses, like there are some like, no way that bird is, that was that bird.
Yeah.
Yep.
And we have Scott Schwenk has a good comment. Scott, you want to give your comment?
Well, sure. Hey, everyone. I was just going to say that what you're looking for, it's going to depend on what kind of threshold you might set and so on, depends on the kind of study you're doing. So like in the ivory-billed woodpecker example, say all you want to know is there any remote possibility that it's out there? Like we want to just see if it's out there. Then you would want to, you don't care about misidentifications of things that aren't really ivory-billed woodpecker. You just would say, okay, there's a detection. Now I can go follow up and see if it's actually there. But in the same case, what if you only wanted to detect if you were absolutely sure it was an ivory-billed woodpecker? In that case, you would be much more conservative in terms of the identification. So just the point is, whatever study you're undertaking, the goals of it, the purpose is going to really dictate, what's acceptable identification because of trade-offs between false detection, false positives and false negatives.
Absolutely. That's a valid point that definitely holds up across a lot of fronts. What I'm holding out for is a magic machine where you can do all possible studies from one recording and basically set your precision and recall to everything, everywhere else. But we're not quite there yet. And the anomaly detectors are different models than the general purpose species richness detectors. Cool. Well, this has been a lot of fun. do we have all our questions answered?
It looks like we do, and we have one comment from Janice Zepko, who resides near where the hooded warblers are found in Toccoa Mountain. And she says that they have been found in the lower elevation areas. So probably climate change, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
No, lots of thank yous. This is fascinating, so out of what we normally do, and will make us all, I mean, it makes us rethink about what we're hearing and why this kind of study is why these kinds of studies and AI is important, because as birders, we want to see more birds, right? But we want to be sure. And so this will be a big help. I mean, this helps us think about that too, at least for me. And thank you so much for coming and talking with us.
Thank you so much.
Our pleasure.
Laura, you might know when